there's this larger question, and I don't want to brush it off, about what happens when progressives lose and they get frustrated and they turn bitter. And you and I have been around long enough. I know people like this.
Me too. Me too.
I know people who are Trump supporters now, who have turned people that used to be on the left with me in the 90s and have grown so bitter by their frustration at the hands of however you want to put it, the Democratic Party, the politically correct, that they have gone in a terrible, terrible, terrible direction.
Well, that is what interests me about this, like with and I think my thinking has evolved a little bit in this respect, is that that's what brings me to this question about populism. Is it a tactic? Is it a disposition? Is it an ideology? Because if it's a tactic, it can be adorned by,
it can be swiped by Trump.
Trump.
I get it. Yeah.
By Watson.
So I would say no, that it's, I don't know what you mean by ideology, but what my meaning of it would be, this is the American version of the Labour Party in England or the Labour Party in Australia. The Labour Party in Australia, actually at one point, they all started at the same time. The Labour Party in Australia considered calling itself the People's Party, just out of homage to what then looked like a promising movement in the United States. And all the social democratic parties in Europe are starting up at the same time. Populism is part of that. And I take my definition, and by the way, my definition is strictly an American one, but my definition of lowercase p populism is a transracial movement of working class people for social democracy. And in American history, it flowers in the 1930s. This is really the great period for it. And we started off talking about Carl Sandburg, which is a kind of cultural populism. And there's many other examples of that. The movies of Frank Capra, almost any World War II movie, and at the same time, the labor movement, and at the same time, Franklin Roosevelt, the New Deal is happening. And that's, for me, that is the great populist period of American life.
But that is not transracial per se. I mean, is it?
Well, the CIO certainly. The CIO, which is the main labor organizing sort of umbrella group at the time, was militantly transracial, militantly anti-racist by the standards of the 1930s. Probably the most anti-racist white group, anyway, that there was in America. I mean, without a doubt. And you think of people like Paul Robeson, who sang this incredible song "Ballad for Americans," which is in some ways this great musical version of American populism, which is explicitly anti-racist. So yeah, that was, again, they weren't anti-racist by our modern day standards. They weren't as enlightened as we are today, but by the standards of the time, yeah, they were very much so.
So what, I guess, and we'll bump up to,
and you got to also remember the anti-populists, the other part of the story. The anti-populists of the 30s and of the 1890s were incredibly racist, just like off the scale racist. Right. Like when they would attack Roosevelt, I did not realize this. I never read this anywhere, Sam, until I did the research for this book, how racist the anti-Roosevelt movement was. It wasn't just, they were into eugenics. I mean, they were fascist. And this is big business in America. These are important corporation lawyers in America, economists in America. They were part of this sort of fascist current coming out of Europe, but thank God for, in this country, at least, we were on the right side of all those questions. While we were celebrating the common man in this country, and our people were writing books like The People, Yes. While the Europeans were writing, Revolt of the Masses,
right.
And Oswald Spengler, this kind of thing.
I want to ask you about that era too, because one thing that I found really interesting was the, I don't know if you would call it patriotism or like the Americanism that was embraced by the populists at that time. And I wonder if, like, what happened to that? Because on some level, it feels like the American
claiming the
imperialism,
symbols. Yeah, right.
American imperialism sort of started to undercut that, and the notion of internationalism on the left undercut that sort of, like, I don't know what you would call it, patriotism.
No, people do call it Americanism, this phenomenon in the 30s when you have labor unions, immigrant groups and stuff like that claiming the symbols of America, the flag, I mean, the labor movement and the flag, and claiming the founding fathers and identifying themselves with American democracy. And often, I mean, let's admit it, in a way that to the modern ear sounds pretty schmaltzy. you know?
I mean, I think that type of jingoism,
well, it wasn't jingoism at the time, but it can blend into that.
Jingoism,
yeah. So
right?
like Michael Kazin has written about this, that this 30s sensibility, which you see, you know, these beautiful like WPA murals celebrating the American people, that does blend into Cold War, into the sort of really unfortunate jingoism of the Cold War and also of our own time. And that is really unfortunate, but that's also because, look, the good guys have been beaten. It's a complicated story, but these symbols, I would say, are always contested. And just because, you know, assholes have them at the moment doesn't mean that we can't take them back.
Do you think we should? I mean, I think that is like,
hell yes.
Well, I'll say this because we drive around, and I drive around with my daughter. She's 15. She is, I don't know where she got it, but she is vehemently anti-Trump, and she is.
Well, why not? Where did she get that? Come on.
Of course. I'm being facetious, but I'm struck by, like, if she sees somebody flying an American flag, her first reaction is like, "Ooh," and I'm like, "What's?" You know, I don't chide her. I interrogate her a little bit about it, but it occurs to me that maybe it was during Vietnam, but that notion of populism, because I don't think you can have a populist movement without some embracing of at least the ambitions of America. And I think there's many on the left who, you know, and I'm talking maybe from a tactical standpoint, right? Like, I mean, I'm also pretty jaded, but I'm trying not to be at times, but I'm talking just from purely a tactical standpoint. You need to embrace some of that Americana. You cannot react like my 15-year-old daughter does. We're driving by. She's like, "Ooh,
Sam." And I, of course, you and I are on exactly the same page. I fly the American flag. I'm extremely patriotic. You know that
But you have to balance it. Like,
of course. Well, think about. Look, one of Thomas Jefferson, for God's sakes. I went to the University of Virginia, and he's the only one of the founding fathers that even remotely believed in democracy. This is the man that wrote the Declaration of Independence. I learned when I was down there, I did a tour of Monticello a few years ago. He wrote the Declaration of Independence on a desk carved for him by a slave. It's incredibly difficult and problematic to pick your way through it.
Right.
That a man could be both great and awful at the same time. And that is troubling. And I guess it's easy to just wash your hands of the whole thing and say, well, to hell with that. I don't even want to think about it. And maybe we need to choose different heroes from our past. I'm fine with that too.
Thomas Paine's up there.
Yeah, Paine's a great one. Franklin Roosevelt, come on. Carl Sandburg, why not?
Right.
You know, and you know, many others. Paul Robeson, we mentioned him. Great man. And maybe we need to do that, but we've still got to have continuity with the past, and we've got to have connections with the American people. What I know will not work is a liberalism that is just about expertise and white collar meritocracy, you know, and being at the top of the hierarchy and ordering everybody else to do as we say. And I know that won't work.